Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're dialing in from today. We're so glad that you're able to join us, whether you're live right now or perhaps you're watching this recording in the future. We're really looking forward to having a conversation, having a panel discussion on sustainable remediation around the globe. I likely know many of y'all, but if you don't know me, I'm Betsy Collins. I'm currently the president of SURF US, and I'll be moderating the panel discussion today. I know that many of y'all are familiar with sustainable remediation, but I will give just a little bit of background on the international history. For the last 15 years, sustainable remediation has expanded around the globe. Depending on where you're joining us from, you've likely heard of SURF, various SURF organizations, of Nikola, of Claire, of ALGA, just a real alphabet soup of sustainable remediation acronyms. And in 2016, this network of organizations formed an alliance known as the International Sustainable Remediation Alliance, or ISRA. And these international organizations communicate on a quarterly basis to share updates and progress. And while each of these organizations are advancing sustainable remediation within their geographic regions, it's critical that through these applications, we appreciate the differences in culture, the differences in ways of life, as well as the differences in regulatory requirements. All things we'll be touching on in today's panel. These organizations also come together to share knowledge through the International SUSTREM Conference. SUSTREM, as you may know, is hosted by a different organization in a different country each year. And that's how we landed on our three panelists today. We have Johan Kriek from the Network for Industrially Contaminated Land Africa, NICOLA, who hosted the SUSTREM 2021. Roy Thun from SURF USA, who just hosted SUSTREM 2022 just last month, and Peter Nadebaum from the Australian Land and Groundwater Association, ALGA, host of SUSTREM 2023. We have an hour and a half set aside for our conversation today. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers, and they're going to give us just a high-level 5-minute or so overview of their respective organization, and then we'll move straight into that panel discussion. So we're expecting to have at least an hour, if not more, for that. So we need to hear from you. I've got some questions prepared, but we really want to know what is sparking y'all's interest today, what's resonating with you, what do you agree with, what do you not agree with. So please start entering at any time those questions into the chat box, and we will ask them of our panel. That is all that I have for the introduction, unless someone wants to remind me of something I forgot before I introduce our first panelist. Beautiful. Okay, then without further ado, I'll introduce our first panelist, Roy Thun, who's again representing SURF USA. Roy is a senior environmental specialist at GHD with 35 years of experience. He's currently serving as an at-large trustee for SURF, in addition to being a member of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transit Authority Sustainability Council member. Roy has also contributed to many guidance documents, including ITRC's Sustainable Resilient Remediation Guidance and ASTM's Remedial Action Resiliency to Climate Impacts. And Roy, with that, take it away, talk about SURF US.
You bet. Thanks, Betsy. Happy to be here and welcome everybody. With respect to SURF US, I'm proud to say SURF US goes back to 2006, when many folks weren't even really thinking about sustainability, let alone application of sustainability to remediation sites. So we have a long, colorful history in promoting the use of sustainable practices here in SURF US, as with ALGA and with NICOLA as well. We can go to the next slide. So you've already met Betsy, and we just wanted to share with you a cross-section of both gender, backgrounds and companies that our diverse current surf board represents. You can see such a great variety of folks from really across the United States that are very deeply involved with surf on a day-to-day basis, and really appreciative of all the help that all the board members provide. Next slide. So with surf in the US, wanted to share with you what our vision and missions are. We recently, within the last couple of years, went on a quest, if you will, to rethink about our future. Really, when I say our future, I mean the future of the planet, and where surf fits in that, helping the planet from a sustainability and resilience perspective. And what you see in our vision is just that. Speaking of the vision, we really do envision a world that's healthy, resilient, and improved by remediating any degraded environmental condition through sustainable practices. And while we continue to have a core interest in contaminated sites and always will, we do recognize that we can use our same resources and knowledge base to address any contaminated or any degraded environmental condition. That could be a forest or a watershed, air, etc. And as with respect to our mission, it really has never changed, right? We're dedicated to advancing sustainable remedies and practices on both a local and global scale through collaboration like this webinar and panel, education and innovation. You can see that we are a nonprofit organization. We're made up of a great variety of people from different backgrounds, as I expressed earlier, and a variety of ways to contribute to surf and helping get our message out and to help others around the world really to implement sustainable practices. Next slide. And when we talk about advancing sustainable remedies and practices, oh, one too many. And when we talk about advancing sustainable remedies and practices, just a few areas in which we currently are contributing there within SURF. We have remediation journals, webinars, technical initiatives, and these are all ways in which you can contribute to SURF. We also collaborate with other organizations. We utilize information, cross-share information from other organizations like Claire or Nikola over in Europe, and happily cross-post information so that we can get the broader message out on sustainable practices. And all of this information is readily available for free on our SURF website. Next slide. And with respect to our vision towards collaboration, education, and innovation, these are just a smattering of what our library contents are. Again, all is readily available, freely accessible, whether that be the newsletters, case studies, guidance and tools, webinars like this, and other online resources. So I'd encourage you to visit our sustainableremediation.org and take a look at what we have to offer on there, and certainly a great resource if you are ever in need of looking for references to assist you on a sustainable remedy. Next slide. And I wanted to give, I think we might have skipped a slide. There was a sponsor slide, but is there one? Double check. Anyways, we can, okay, no, I guess it's fine. Go ahead. So I wanted to just kind of give a quick overview of sustainable remediation US, as we will be talking about throughout this panel. In the US, green and sustainable remediation has really been evolving since its inception, but we do see an inflection point around 2016, 2017, and then that primarily, I think, is contributed or attributed to the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, climate change impacts, certainly here in the US and throughout North America, as well as other factors. US EPA reporting on climate impacts to our top hazardous waste sites or Superfund sites. And then the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Flint, talking about ESG and the importance of corporations embracing and being forthright with trying to drive sustainability into their business models. SURF in the U.S., we have assisted in our team in a variety of guidance documents, including the ones you see here, the 2021 release of the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council Sustainable Resilient Remediation Guidance, and also the ASTM Standard Guide for Remedial Action Resilience to Climate Impacts. So we're really proud to be a part of those. We think they are fantastic guidances that are both talking about, of course, resiliency and where resiliency plays in the world of sustainability, and capturing in the little box at the bottom of your slide. I love this quote from the ITRC guidance, thinking of sustainability as it considers the remedy's impact on the environment, but resilience considers the environment's impact on the remedy. And without having that resilience, we really can't be truly sustainable. So it's one of the thoughts I just want to leave you there. And with that, I do want to thank our sponsors. I think we skipped the slide, but it's okay. I just will, without naming them all. We couldn't do it without the great help from all of the sponsors we have here at SURF US, and we are greatly appreciated to their continued contribution, both as a sponsor, but also as a contributor to the guidances and webinars and other things that they do day in and day out for us. So thank you there. Back to you, Betsy.
Thanks, Roy, for that great overview, that state of the practice, and thank you for the shout out to our sponsors. I know we've got another slide at the very end of things where we can thank them again, because again, so greatly appreciative. But we'll introduce our next panelist. Our next panelist is Peter Nadebaum, representing ALGA and SURF ANZ. Peter is a senior technical director of GHG and an accredited environmental auditor for contaminated sites with more than 40 years of experience. He was a founding member of SURF ANZ, the Australian Land and Groundwater Association, ALGA, as well as CRC CARE, the Australian Cooperative Research Centre for Assessment and Remediation of the Environment. He also has been contributing. I know it's a very impressive resume. He's also been contributing to guidance, including the ISO standard on sustainable remediation. So Peter, take it away.
Thanks very much, Betsy. Yeah, look, I'd like to just give you a quick introduction to SURF ANZ, that's SURF Australia and New Zealand, and just what we're doing. Now, next slide. I won't take you right through this, but basically, where SURF ANZ is supported by ALGA, so they're key in this whole thing. ALGA, the Australian Land and Groundwater Association, and they provide the backup support and administrative support and funding for SURF ANZ. We're also a member of ISRA, and we're active there. We're committed to development, promotion of sustainable remediation practices in contaminated land and groundwater. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We have a steering committee, quite a large one, and it's drawn from companies who have the problems, who own the problems, but also consultants, contractors, and so on. Dr. David Tully is the current chair of our committee. We also have Paul Nathaniel from LQM, Land Quality Management in the UK. He was instrumental in developing an international standard, the ISO 18504. So he's a member also of our committee and quite active. Thanks. Next slide. So the overall objective that we have is that applying the principles of sustainable remediation is recognised as a necessary part of developing a site remediation and management strategy, and is written into formal regulatory requirements and is a normal part of responding to site contamination. And we're trying to sort of work ourselves out of the business, really, for Surf ANZ, because when we see that when this is achieved, there won't be any need for Surf ANZ. It'll be, basically a self-sustaining system, but we're not there yet. And so that's what we're aiming at doing with our committee. We're aiming to sort of normalise and embed sustainable remediation, through our site contamination practices. Next slide. The strategy that we're adopting is one of promoting awareness, need for knowledge of how to apply sustainable remediation. And so we have been active in working with the regulated agencies, CRC Care, and developing national remediation guidance, which in Australia is the National Remediation Framework. And also promoting and has been picked up by other groups, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia, ISCA. So they have they're large, they look after large infrastructure projects and provide a ranking and certification process. So things like major freeways and tunneling projects and airports and things like this, and that in turn, so they have a ranking and certification process that refers to sustainable remediation, and that's been picked up by the state governments who've, not all of them, but they're mandating this requirement for ranking and certification of their projects, to accord with sustainability principles. We're also adopting ISO 18504 for sustainable remediation. That's an international standard, but it will be adopted quite soon, we think, as an Australian standard. And this is all part of sort of normalising and writing into regulation, the principles of sustainable remediation. And we're, all our members are busily contributing to conferences and technical sessions. For example, SUSTREM in next year in Australia. And we are trying to reinforce that, by adopting the principles of sustainable remediation, can offer a competitive advantage. And certainly you see that with the ISCA ranking and certification. It's quite significant in terms of which contractors get appointed, and it forces them to become very innovative in their sustainability approaches. And we're reinforcing that it's not a do-nothing strategy. In the past, there was a great concern from the regulators that that this was a ruse, adopting sustainable remediation to do nothing, to do less. The way we've formulated it is to make sure that the decision basis is to comply with the regulatory requirements first up. And so we can't be charged with saying, oh, look, we're trying to get around the regulatory requirements. We comply with the regulatory requirements. We then have the need to achieve an acceptable risk, and that's consulting, with stakeholders and so on, considering resilience, which is a newer element, and balancing the outcomes. And so, this is, so it's not a do-nothing strategy. We have to comply with the regulatory requirements. And so what we're looking forward to is a balanced, responsible approach to climate change in particular, which is very significant here in Australia with bushfires, wildfires, and floods. Next slide. And the sorts of things that we've been doing, we've had a series of workshops around Australian cities and New Zealand cities. We've included within those workshops, getting our buy-in with ISCA and state regulators and practitioners. So these workshops have not just been SURF representatives, but also key stakeholders in the area. And by having the state regulators present at each of these workshops, it certainly emphasises the connection with the state regulatory authorities. We have in our national conferences, ALGA runs national contaminated site conferences, the Eco Forum in particular, and we have SURF ANZ sessions, and so each of those conferences will have had a SURF ANZ session, and interesting topics being considered, and in some cases looking back at large projects and analysing them and saying, well, would we do something different now? And that was done very recently by John Hunt for the Sydney Olympic site, huge area, a lot of complex contamination issues, and looking forward and seeing all the issues that now arise, and also the resilience issues that come up. Looking at particular topics like PFAS contamination, how do you approach a PFAS contaminated site, and what does sustainable remediation look like for that sort of issue? It's a big deal in Australia, PFAS, and so we are, that sort of topic creates real interest. And we've established a sustainable remediation award, which is given at our annual dinner, and a presentation by the winner. Next slide. So my final comments are that we see sustainable remediation to be a balanced, responsible approach to site remediation. We see that it's more rigorous with its longer-term view than what might otherwise take place if you just sort of bumble along and create your remediation action plans and so on. But so it's a rigorous, more longer-term view, thinks through the issues, reduces risks, protects human health and the environment, reduces wastage. It can reduce cost. It responds to climate change imperatives, and can assist in maintaining a social license to operate and develop sites. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter. Another really nice overview. On to our last panelist. We have Johan Kriek with Nikola. Johan has 21 years of environmental and contamination consulting and project management experience, and is currently the treasurer for Nikola. His work has spanned throughout the project life cycle, and although he's currently based in South Africa, he's worked in many African countries, including Botswana, Burkina Faso, Chad, Liberia. Really, the list goes on and on. A lot of experience coming from Johan. So Johan, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Betsy. It's really a privilege for us to be a part of an international discussion like this. I certainly cannot represent all of Africa, but I will just come and present my opinion, having worked in a contaminated land arena for the last 20 years or so. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of Nikola, it was really established, let's say about 10 years ago, as a spin-off from Nikola, the European division, and we wanted to start establishing a common forum in South Africa, and really from that point then push it forward into Africa. It's grown in leaps and bounds from a small fledgling organization to the one that we are now. There's been great growth for us. So why was it initiated? Well, it's a non-profit professional member association dedicated to enhancing the management of contaminated land management in Africa. We want to promote cooperation between industry, mining, academia, regulators and service providers, while linking closely with the fields of contaminant hydrogeology, geochemistry and waste management. We are dependent on our professionals' time, volunteering their time, and also on our members, sponsor companies that are members for us. And we want to manage contaminated land within a science-based, sustainable best practice framework. And we really are, our first aim was to really establish consensus around managing contaminated land, and sustainable remediation is a big part of that. But we're at the onset of really grappling with how does it look like for us, what will we incorporate in terms of sustainable remediation, and how can we take it forward. And then, as I said, we rely on in-kind contributions and time of our members. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Our current steering committee, we headed up by Tracy Drew. We're also very well represented from clients to consultants in the arena, and it's been very exciting to be part of the organization. A lot of hard work going on in the background. I'll talk a little bit maybe on the next slide, if you can go to that, just some of what we are trying to achieve. We've got some main aims. One is to really provide a common platform for clients, industry, and academia to come together. To do that, we have made a number of position papers, and we also have a whole bunch of new position papers that we are working on that we're hoping will provide a common understanding of how do we treat contaminated land from sustainable remediation and all of these important topics. We also present contaminated land training, which has been very successful, that we've provided to industry, and also hopefully in the near future to our regulators to share current knowledge and understanding. We also have networking events where we had last week just an opportunity for our members to come together and share ideas, especially after all the lockdowns we had. It was nice to have an in-person session again and just kind of see what's happening in each other's world. In terms of sustainable remediation, it was one of those topics that the steering committee put on the agenda to say we need to have a formal understanding and statement. And in February this year, we published our first document to state what do we as an organization see as sustainable remediation. We do not dictate to any of our members what they should use, how they should use it, or any indicators, but we just wanted to say this is what we believe it should look like, and we also just included some references that they could use to start implementing sustainable remediation. And I think that should be the end of the slides. Sorry, just in terms of our contributors, also very important, we had a number of companies and individuals who contributed to the preparation of this document. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Betsy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Johan. Another great overview. And with that, I'd like to have Roy and Peter come back. I think we'll stop sharing screens probably and get into the fun part, get into the questions. I see Roy. Peter, are you out there? Have we lost you?
Yeah, coming.
There you
Okay.
are. Beautiful. Oh man, this is great. Okay. Well, yeah, let's get into the first question. Johan, I think I'll toss it to you first. You're still warmed up from your overview. So what do you see as the biggest challenge for sustainable remediation in the future?
Thanks, Betsy. I think for Africa, what I've seen is that there really lacks a very comprehensive legal framework for the management of contaminated land. And we've really, without that framework to look at contaminated land, sustainable remediation is not going to get onto the agenda. Almost trying to say, let's start looking at contaminated land and the management thereof, and then hopefully we can incorporate sustainability practices as we go around that. Certain countries have got well-established legal frameworks and others don't have any. And what we've relied on a lot in Africa is big clients and their ESG standards to help implement remediation drivers, not really the legal frameworks. But I think that would be one area that we need to focus on.
Peter, what do you think? What similarities or differences are you seeing?
Look, I think we have a similarity. We see it essential to have it written into the sustainable remediation written into our practices, and we have an auditing system in Australia whereby the processes, the assessments, the remediation action plans, and so forth are audited, third-party auditors, and it really needs that to be written in. For it to be locked into the process, and we're sort of gradually getting there. At the outset, generally we're carrying out projects in accordance with the principles of sustainable remediation, and so even though I might say some things where we have problems or could develop better, in the past we've been generally achieving pretty good outcomes. We have a flexible system in Australia, and that allows us to consider options and so on. But back to the key question, the biggest challenge for sustainable remediation, I think, is getting an imbalance, particularly where the requirements are very costly to remediate, and complex, and risk is a key issue. Then that can be the entire focus. It can distract, and so the consultants and site owners and things like this can focus on that and not think about balancing the social and environmental aspects. It's all about risk mitigation, and so if you focus just on that could, I think, end up with imbalance and not so much a balanced outcome. So anyway, I could talk more about that, but that might be a starting point.
Thanks, Peter. Roy, you got any thoughts?
Well, definitely similar to both Africa and Australia, Southern Hemisphere, really. In the U.S., we see, as Peter was noting, there really isn't yet an achieved balance for addressing remediation sites in a sustainable, consistent, sustainable way. And it is because regulatorily, generally speaking, the primary interest is addressing human health and the environment, and that's completely understandable from risk mitigation. But what we do see is we're seeing both legislatively, whether it's coming back through infrastructure bills and individual states' policies and guidances, we do see sustainable practices now seeping more into the environmental remediation area. And so that makes me feel better when we see states like New Jersey or Washington State, here in my home state, California, actually adopting views that infuse thinking about and trying to adopt sustainable practices, and to some extent even trying to quantify them as part of the overall remedy. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's absolutely still a challenge. We're split, in the responsible parties are split between limited funding and larger, perhaps in some cases, ESG directives, and trying to make everything work such that you can appease everything is absolutely a difficult task still. We're not making it much easier right now still.
Thanks, Sean, for that first answer, and just hearing that, I'm going to throw you your first audible already. The first question was, what is the biggest challenge for sustainable remediation? But I think we have to balance that with where is our greatest opportunity. So if folks have some thoughts on the greatest opportunity in sustainable remediation, and then to our audience, just another reminder to keep dropping your questions or your thoughts into that Q&A box. What do you think, panelists? Any thoughts on opportunities?
It's a tricky area, actually. I think Roy put it very well, actually. We have, one of the problems is we have different interest groups. Obviously the regulators, environmental regulators, and that's their key focus, and that's what they're there to do, and they focus on that. They have written into their charters a lot of the principles of sustainable practices, but at the end of the day, they're there to minimise risk to the environment, and so that becomes their overwhelming issue. And then you have these stakeholders who are also quite often concerned about risk and the social aspects, and so they will push in a different direction. And so it's this continuous pushing and pulling that makes it quite difficult to. And so, I think one of the key things for our processes, sustainable remediation processes, where I think there really is benefit, is encouraging this consultation between parties to put on the table all the different aspects and to stand back and look at them, because I think it's that dialogue and consultation whereby you can get better outcomes than if you just get pushed by one party or the other. And so I think that's the key opportunity, is to to engage in the dialogue and to look for the balance, to look for common areas of interest to be able to see the other's perspectives.
Mm. Yeah, I think, Peter, if I can add to that from an African perspective, people have been bombarded by the term sustainability for so long, and a lot of people have never understood how could they really implement it. So I think the opportunity for us, the timing, during SUSTREAM last year, we had an ESG consultant say it's never been a better time to be in the industry like it is right now. So I think the time is good to implement it, and what we have as an opportunity is, as we start engaging with sustainability, we can show regulators and clients how we can implement sustainability in managing contaminated land. So I think the big opportunity for us is to get going and use the momentum that we currently have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Johanna is saying, that, and I think an opportunity, Betsy, that has clearly got momentum in the US that we can build upon beyond is brownfields. So the brownfield program in the United States is incredibly robust. It is well backed by US EPA, and you can understand why, right? It's taking these areas that have been previously built upon, have contamination, and revitalizing large swaths of land into productive use again. And what I see as a commonality with regard to brownfields is sustainability is definitely getting worked into that. It is no longer becoming a one-off or a special case where we're considering biodiversity or our energy sources or just general footprint. I really do see that uplift happening in the brownfields arena, and I feel like that if we look at the whole of contaminated sites, brownfields being a subset, I do think that will start translating over into more robustly into remediation sites at large, because it is such a great example with respect to the successes in applying sustainable practices in brownfields. So thanks for that question, Betsy.
Thank you. We've got our first audience question, which is really digging into those challenges and the ways that we're seeing innovation come to overcome those challenges. The question reads, in remedial approaches, we're developing innovations to various site challenges, perhaps not just sustainability challenges, that result in lower waste, shorter life cycle, less material use. I think this is a US-based person, so I think they're in particular interested in Africa and Australia, but what innovations you've seen to address these challenges or that might have a similar effect. Any thoughts, Johan, from Africa?
Yeah, I would see, in terms of what certainly has worked in our favor is that Africa hasn't had to reinvent the wheel when it comes to innovation. We've really looked at well-developed countries and forums like SURF in the US and SURF UK to kind of implement and use that in our best management practices, how we screen our projects. So I can't say that we've got to this really great innovation yet that we want to share with the world. Is kind of just implementing what we've learned so far and really trying to get that on the table for discussion.
Absolutely. What do you think, Peter?
Look, I think the area is in continual innovation. You know, as problems come up, if they're difficult problems, then we sit down and work towards addressing them, and that's what I see with in our regulatory areas. For example, you know what might be first put on the table as being a way forward with remediation or whatever. They might mandate something or other, and then it becomes apparent there are problems with that, and things get changed. Things do adjust and reflect, and when the problems are identified. So and what we see at our conferences and the approaches being taken, a lot of thought is going into solutions, and how to make them more, well, we use the term practicable here in Australia, looking for practicable solutions. And so what that constitutes, what is the best practicable solution that will tick all the boxes, with our stakeholders, and balance the issues, and particularly address issues that are right at the fore at the moment, like climate change, reducing waste and energy usage and things like this. That so this is where the innovation can come in, and and certainly the methods, things like natural source zone depletion and so on, methods which are inherently less consumptive of resources and can provide better long-term outcomes. Think about time in the equation as well, rather than an immediate response on matters. And so I think you do get the innovation occurring.
And I'm sure Sustrum 2023 will be a great opportunity to hear more about the great innovations from around the world. Roy, did you have anything to add to that one?
Well, it's a great question. And, I was just at, just a few weeks ago, Battelle put on the first ever Innovations in Climate Resilience conference. It was held in Columbus. So it's a fantastic question around that. So I got to see, where the national labs and Battelle and others, where they're thinking in terms of innovations. It wasn't just resilience, of course, sustainability and greenhouse gases, carbon footprint in general. And so I love seeing everything from, blue and green hydrogen, biodiversity, using pyrolysis, advancing the science of pyrolysis to create biochar and reduce the amount of waste from wastewater treatment plants, even concrete, how one company is really advancing the reuse of concrete in a manner that would reduce the need for future, we'll call it virgin concrete, and the carbon footprint associated with that. So we definitely are seeing innovations coming out, and all of which to some extent can be applied to smaller footprint remediation sites. So that's really exciting and absolutely great to see these innovations.
Great questions, good insights. We're already hearing a lot of the ways that just the topic of sustainability is so broad, and we're all familiar with the idea, I think, of the triple bottom line, and Peter alluded to it in one of his answers. So my next question to the panel is, in your experience, are you seeing the environmental, social, and economic legs of sustainability being addressed equally at remediation sites? Maybe Roy, if you're ready, over to you first.
Yeah, it would be nice, Betsy, right? It would be nice to see that things were more balanced. But from my perspective, there's a reason why sometimes they're not balanced, and that can be because the reality of the situation for cleaning up a site draws not just the attention but the need to address the environmental issues first, and there may be, in fact, when we look at the social and the economic components of that, they may already been in place. So it isn't necessarily that when you go look at a remediation site that each one has to be addressed equally. It depends on where each of those areas is in the process, right? Are our communities already involved to a great extent? Is the economic benefit and uplift already present? So really, it's where do you have to shift in order to create that sort of balance? But on the other hand, especially in the social arena, we just don't do a good job. It is almost always an afterthought, unless and until a community action group or a nonprofit steps forward and says, not in my neighborhood, things are going to be different. But unfortunately, that tends to be the lightning rod that draws the attention to the social aspect of sustainability. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to overcome that. You know, we just don't look at it with the same vigor that we do, say, environmental or even economic, depending on whose side of the fence you're standing on, the responsible party or the impacted community.
Thank you, Roy. Johan, what are you seeing in Africa? Are you seeing the environmental, social, and economic legs being valued equally, or?
I would say, you know, from a theoretical answer, I would say yes. But what we've seen recently is that the social part is becoming a lot more important. You know, and a couple of years ago, we would be able to go think of the best solution and implement it. But now, you know, we have communities that will come onto sites and completely stop all work. And you need to kind of understand how will that happen? It's happening more often. And if you don't provide certain work options for the local community, you know, they will just not allow you to continue with work. And that's becoming more adamant, or, you know, more upfront for us. So we have to think about that on the onset, have discussions with our clients and say, how are we going to manage the potential social impact? And it's not going to, you know, it's becoming more tricky to kind of manage these impacts as well, because we've got macro elements involved as well, that if we don't fix that, we're not going to be able to fix it on a local scale.
What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I think very good question, very good points raised. Actually, it's a complex area actually, because you know, all projects are different. You know, sites are different, the stakeholders are different, and so the emphasis, the priorities differ from site to site, and I think that's the nature of sustainable remediation. But I would say that the key issue here is if the costs get very high, if the remedy is very difficult and the costs are high, then that pushes you to it sort of loads up the economic leg very much, because you may not be able to do anything if the costs get too high, and so. So the imbalance can come about through just the pressures, the cost pressures, or whatever. But if it's and also what I see anyway is the issue of the level of risk can vary, and the risk tolerance can vary from regulator to regulator, to site, and stakeholders, and that. I guess this is all part of the sustainable remediation balance, but it can have very profound outcomes on the remedy. And if there's a risk tolerance, then you can adopt certain outcome approaches or not. And so it's a complex area, and to say one area is focused on more than other, I think. I think it just gets pushed and pulled according to the site and the problems and the stakeholders, and it's almost the nature of sustainable remediation.
Peter, that was a perfect segue into our next question, which came from an audience member. We've hit on a couple of topics, but she specifically asked, with the lack of regulatory drivers for sustainable, resilient remedies, what are driving projects? Is it corporate ESGs, environmental, social governance, the buzzword? Is it grassroots efforts, as perhaps Johan was speaking to? Is it the stakeholder engagement, Peter, as you were just alluding to? What is the driver?
Well, I could add to that. The ultimate driver is the regulation, the legal framework. You've got to address contamination. You've got to address risk, and so that's written into our environmental legislation. And so you can't have a situation which poses an unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. So that's fundamentally you've got to do something, and that introduces fear of liability and so on. If you don't address things correctly, you can't develop land, you can't move forward, and so that's the ultimate driver. And then it's a matter of balancing those imperatives with other the costs and the stakeholder perceptions and concerns and things like that, and the returns that the stakeholders might get out of things, so the social dimension. And so but at the end of the day, it's human health and the environment which is an imperative that we must protect, and we do.
Yeah, a common thread for sure. Johan, are things a little bit different in practice in Africa?
I think there it is different. What I've found is that it's really the ESG standards of big multinationals that have driven remediation work in Africa. A lot of countries don't have the legal framework, so there's no law that states they have to do it. If there is, it might be very limited. So what we found is that, it's actually big corporates saying that we need to do something, and we want to do it in the same way that we do it in other continents as well. And that's worked well. The problem is not all ESG standards are the same, not all corporates are the same. For example, in terms of drivers, in South Africa, we've got more than 4,000 abandoned mines. The previous miners have left, and now it's owned by the state, and they're not being remediated. Why? Because the state doesn't have the funds to remediate it, and the polluter is long gone. So nothing's happening. So the legal framework is there for us to remediate the sites, but there's just no funding for it at the moment, and that real ESG driver is not being implemented.
Really interesting. Roy, what do you think from the US perspective?
I surprisingly, I think it reflects a lot of what Johan said for South Africa. Amazingly, the orphan sites that we call them here in the United States that are placed within the care of the state or federal government, those are being treated like with Band-Aids, right? They're not necessarily thinking about sustainability. It's like, how do we just protect the environment and human health? What can we do to stop the major damage because of the funding issue primarily? And perhaps differently than South Africa, we do have the regulations that can greatly support the efforts to implement, climate change reducing stressors, right? When the states or federal government are responsible for these sites, but it's still not moving. And I agree with Johan as well. ESG has become a major motivator for large corporations, especially that are holding these environmental liabilities. I akin it to, what he had said, what you had said earlier about the local protests shutting down projects, and reputationally, that's what we saw with large corporations in the U.S. They may not have necessarily made all of the same level of efforts, especially in the sustainability arena, on a site, were it not for a community action group or others raising the attention and arguably reputationally hurting them. With ESG, that's elevated the message. Right now, you have your shareholder base, your investors, your insurers, your banks, all looking at not just your balance sheet, but your whole risk profile as it pertains to climate impact. And that is absolutely driving some decisions into the sustainable side of the equation, which is great.
Yeah, look, I would endorse that as well. Actually, I think that it's certainly key issues in Australia.
I'm glad you jumped in, Peter, because I did see you nodding, and I was going to throw it back over to you and put you back on the spot to wrap us up with that question. I was reminded to tell everyone, keep sending questions, comments. We've got a bunch, and so we're getting to as many as we can, but we can respond to them offline if we don't have time for all of them. So trying to keep track of them, but just keep inputting them as we go through. Our next question is perhaps a little bit more practical, a little bit more tangible. How do you think we can make sustainable remediation a part of our decision-making process on all remediation projects? Roy, let's start with you this time.
All remediation projects. Well, I do think these types of collaborations across hemispheres, sharing these experiences really help a lot. Some fabulous work that's been done by SURF UK in particular, developing appendices to address and simplify how to look at which sites and which aspects of the investigation and remedy, best management practices for implementing sustainable practices. I think that continued cross connection and discussion is so valuable for all of the professionals who are in this business and trying to get sustainability built into projects. With regard to the general public, I think that is a tremendous challenge. Just so many things face the general public as noise, and I'm not so certain remediation of a contaminated site will ever rise to the same level of concern or interest as other things that they hear on a daily basis. But it shouldn't stop us from trying. I think the other key area that will help us to make sustainable remediation more prolific across all sites is continuing to affect policy change. I don't think it matters if you're a Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. If you have the right regulations that support responsible remedies that are considerate of the climate, as well as our limited resources, then we will come to better solutions for our remedies. And we just, it's not about trying to make responsible parties pay more money. It's just trying to make better decisions. And I think if we can invoke that into the process earlier, they will save money ultimately, and certainly bonus value to the planet. Thanks, Betsy.
Absolutely, Roy. Johan, what do you think about how we can integrate sustainability into our decision-making process?
Yeah, I think, whatever's not talked about is forgotten. And I want to agree with Roy here, is all the discussions that's been had, it's all the industry forums that's been created, that's making it more of a topic of discussion. And I see such momentum behind it. And I think we're in the right trajectory. It's not where we want to be, but it's certainly more of a topic of discussion. And I also want to just take the opportunity to thank organizations like SURF and SURF UK, because that's allowed us to bring it into the forefront and actually implement and use tools and techniques already that we didn't have beforehand. So if it wasn't for these types of discussions and forums, we would still be behind. So I think the discussions is the way we're going to do it.
Johan, there were some really good sound bites in there. I think I'm going to pull them out and quote you on a billboard. Really impactful. Thank you. Peter, what do you think, building upon those?
Well, I tend to go back and think of the rules and regulations. If it's written in, even at a high level, into these principles must be considered. As soon as if you write that in, then consultants contractors will consider those issues, and then you can have auditors auditing them, making sure these things are being taken into account. So if you write it in and have a checking process, then that it'll take a life of its own. Actually, people will consider these issues. They'll look at how they can best deal with these issues. What the solutions are. They can look over their shoulder at other sites and other solutions. And so I think the key thing is to in some way mandate the requirement. It doesn't need to be done in great detail, and so we tend to favour something like the ISO 18504, which is pretty simple. It's pretty high level, and in some ways, it may be easier to deal with. But as soon as you say you've got to follow that process, and you're going to be checked to make sure that you do follow the process, then I think things will follow, and our industry is pretty innovative and thoughtful, and I think having that mandated to follow the process will bring better solutions. And so anyway, I tend to be a little bit of a rules and regulations guy, I guess, reflecting my background.
I think so, and also where things stand in Australia. It sounds like y'all are just closer to it as well, and have made more progress potentially in that area. I have to say, I've now lost track. We hit everybody for that question. Yes? Did I miss anybody?
Yeah, I think, Betsy, if I can maybe just add one thing to that.
Please.
Is that I agree with Peter. I think that's where we want to be in terms of having good legal frameworks and all of that in place and checks and balances. But what I've seen is that we might have them, but they're still not being implemented well locally or in our continent. And I think really for us to have benefit, it will have to show value. We'll have to be able to show that sustainable remediation adds value to local communities, if it's job creation or a better environment or whatever it might be. But without that buy-in, we might have all the laws that we could have, but it's just not going to roots level.
Yeah, thank you for that add. And Johan, while you're off mute, we've got a follow-up question for you. Someone is particularly interested in your mentioning the thousands of abandoned mine sites, and they asked what the communities living around those mine sites would want to do with those sites. Are they even aware? Are there community relation I guess practices in place?
It is unfortunately it is very varied in response. Some of these sites have just been fenced off and left, and kind of communities have evolved around it and they've lived with it. Others, we have a long history of asbestos. So a lot of these mines are old asbestos mines, and communities were affected. So some remedial measures had to be implemented. So we've seen some work being done, but obviously, you need it faster and better to really make an impact. And I think the sad part is I was driving the other day seeing kids swimming in old mine quarry water. That is just, it's not supposed to happen. So the education is not there. So unfortunately, I think when you're at that level of poverty, sometimes, you make do with what you have. And if there's something next door to you, you're going to make use of it. So unfortunately, I think people have just gotten used to it, and some have just adapted to it.
Thanks, Johan. And I know that was a very specific question, but I don't know, Roy or Peter, if you have anything to add or any thoughts about just that general example.
No, I don't.
Sorry, what was the question, Betsy?
Oh, just if you had anything to add on top of Johan's example, but I think
Right.
it's likely that is a challenge in Africa, not so much of a challenge outside of Africa, or perhaps not in Australia and the United States.
Yeah, look, funding is always an issue. Yeah, we have thousands of mine sites, abandoned mine sites, and and what addressing those is a challenge. It costs money, and so then it's a question of allocation of funds to address the, if there's pressing human health or safety concerns with particular sites, then there will tend to be a response. But certainly, I've felt there's a gap between the regulatory requirements in terms of outcome, the environmental requirements that you might desire for a mine site, if compared with what you have for contaminated sites in urban areas, there can be different different criteria applied, and based on practicability and cost, because quite often mine sites have huge volumes of material and and very difficult acid mine drainage, things like this, very difficult problems to address, and to try and achieve the objectives that you might achieve and set for urban sites is not necessarily practicable for mine sites. And so so these are the difficulties, the funding and what you do. And I think generally our states take a risk-based approach. They address the most outstanding issues, the real high risks, but to try and get everything back up to a good environmental standard it would be quite challenging cost-wise, and I don't think the states would have the funds to do that. And so it's a prioritization.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for that. We clearly have so much experience and so much expertise in this virtual room today. How can we share and how can we utilize that expertise, that experience, and possibly different practices from multiple sustainable remediation groups? Johan, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, certainly, Betsy. I think what we've really appreciated is all the case studies that's been published. If you go to a local client trying to convince them to implement, sustainable remediation, having some good published case studies really helps them to understand how this could add benefit to their project and their program. And there again, so it's all the hard work that's being done that helps us to sell it more in a local context.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Peter?
In terms of sharing knowledge and innovation and things like that, our systems with our conferences and things like that are pretty good actually at sharing information. We've something that I don't know if it's been appreciated, but we have an audit system whereby third-party auditors audit the work that's being carried out by others, and that's actually a knowledge sharing basis. So so you might have one consultant actually doing the assessment and developing the remediation strategy and things like that, but then you have another consultant who actually checks that off, and critically scrutinizes it and looks to make sure that it's following the right regulatory processes and so forth. But what that does do is it automatically forces sharing across the industry, because it's two consultants working on the same project and learning. So if there's innovation, it automatically gets brought out to the checking consultant, and that checking consultant can then apply those same concepts and ideas elsewhere. And so we have our system actually is pretty good at sharing information and knowledge, and perhaps the biggest difficulties, there's so much out there. There's so many ideas and guidance and new. I'm coming to the Patel conference shortly, and all the innovations that are occurring, the ideas, and trying to grasp and understand and apply everything that's developing. These are challenging things just to assimilate the body of knowledge usefully. But our industry does share.
Absolutely. What do you think, Roy?
Peter's spot on. We in terms of the environmental consulting industry are incredibly giving as far as sharing information. People move around, that also occurs and helps to do the knowledge sharing. And organizations like ISRA that you mentioned early in the opening, right? We're working together to understand what each supporting member is doing in this space so that we can take it back and share that as well with our individual organizations. So I do think that it's an ongoing collaborative effort. When something new and novel comes out, it spreads like wildfire, regardless of which hemisphere or which organization you're in. So it's always been good to see. It's one of the rare areas where, while as individual companies, perhaps we strive to help get in front of things from a marketing basis, but I think from an overall sustainability perspective, we're glad to share the sustainable practices themselves and be able to implement those regardless of where we sit.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's
Betsy,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just jumped in there. But on individual projects, I think the workshop approach is very valuable, where you have because we, as I'm referring to our auditing system, so having the primary consultant, the auditor, the client, sometimes the regulator involved in workshops about examining the problem, how to address it, the options, what's critical, things like that, and that's what I find is that workshopping process is very valuable because it gets everything out on the table and it gets the options, and all of a sudden the different perspectives can be brought to the fore. So simple methods of how you carry out a project with a degree of collaborative effort, because at the end of the day, it's management 101. If you have a number of people involved, you always get a better solution than the single individual, and so that's pooling that knowledge. So you have the groundwater guys together with the risk guys, together with the the contractors and things like this. These different perspectives, each will come with a different knowledge base and perspective, but if you pull that together, fantastic, much better outcomes.
Yeah, and it's a great segue into another question we've got about what tools are you seeing used for incorporating sustainable remediation in the remediation process. And I say it's a good segue, Peter, because I think your example of workshops is a great example of perhaps not necessarily a quote unquote sustainable remediation tool, but it is a very effective strategy tool in bringing all the stakeholders together. So what other thoughts, perhaps starting with Roy, do you have on either specific tools or just general strategies to promote sustainable remediation?
And Betsy, in the US, and I know you know this very well, the use of environmental footprint analysis or sustainability analysis or carbon footprinting is just now starting to gain, I think, more widely accepted interest. The two probably most popular being Site-Wise, developed by Battelle, Department of Defense, US Army Corps of Engineers, and the US EPA's CEFA tool, both being designed specifically for looking at remedies and the greenhouse gases, and in some cases, like Site-Wise, even the worker risk for the site. So I really, in terms of tools, those immediately come to mind as functional tools to help anyone understand what is the initial or baseline sustainable footprint of your remediation site, and then having that capability of then comparing that to optimization of that remedy or even looking at an alternative remedy. I think it's a fantastic way to start that conversation on either side, whether you're a regulator or regulated responsible party, right? I'd like to see more of it, and I know you've done it. I've been involved in it as well. I think it's a fantastic way to start that tools conversation.
Absolutely, Roy, and I think that you'd be kicking yourself later if I didn't add on the ITRC Sustainable Resilient Remediation guidance. You know, such a good resource for processes to follow, and then also a pretty extensive list of sustainable best management practices that can be implemented, but also completely agree about site-wise and CEFA. And as you were starting, you know, that list, I think this would be, you know, will be something really interesting. We can pull together some of these publicly available resources after the call, and I'll send those out to everyone who's attending and put those links in the YouTube, not comment section, the description section for where the video is posted, so that folks can easily find hopefully these tools and resources that we are discussing. So Johan, same question. What tools are we utilizing for sustainable remediation?
Yeah, you know, as an organization, we don't dictate to any of our members what they should be using. In our published document, we have referenced a whole bunch of SURF UK guidance documents and tools. So at the moment, that's, I think, the go-to documents. But I really like your idea of just sharing that, you know, and it will help me to share that in our organization locally as well.
Great, thank you. And Peter, what do you think?
Look, yeah, in terms of general guidance, we have, you know, there's general guidance out there, and we can draw on it, you know, at the highest level, things like the ISO 18504 and that sort of thing. Yeah, and we just love all the stuff that's produced out of the US, you know, the ITRC material and things like that. We just, you know, it's fantastic to be a fantastic resource that that we can draw on, and we do refer to the various documents. We have a caution about promoting particular tools as such, because they tend to come from, you know, quite often they're developed with a particular aspect in mind, you know, like greenhouse gas emissions and things like that, and it's only one part of the equation. And so the danger is, you know, I know I was, you know, involved in some of the early workshops in Battelle when these, you know, a couple of tools were being developed and promoted at that time. Yeah, at first glance you say, "Whoa, this is fantastic," but when you stand back and look at them, they are addressing only a particular aspect, and if you're not careful, you start making decisions on that aspect and not considering other issues that, you know, may not be as easily quantified, but are important in the overall, you know, economic, social, and environmental legs, actually. And so you've got to be a bit careful with tools, I think, and we don't mandate them. You know, the international standard doesn't mandate or, you know, particularly promote particular tools. You know, they're there to be used as the site requires, but I think you've got to be a bit careful about trying to make decisions. Yeah, they are an aspect of decision making, but not, you shouldn't put everything around the revolve around that tool and only that tool.
That's such a good point. These tools are a tool in our toolbox, but I completely agree with this idea that it can't be the only thing being considered. That's a great point. Building upon that, and again, hopefully to add to a comprehensive list, does your organizations have webinars, trainings, other educational opportunities that folks could participate in? So I guess I should start with somebody, shouldn't I? Sure, yeah, Peter.
That's right. Look, not to the same extent as the US, or, yeah, and the guidance documents that have come out of the UK, for example. But certainly, we have introductory material, workshops, things like that, and it's evolving, but we're not, our toolbox in a sense with the resources is not nearly as well developed as in the US. We'd like to have it better, but we are limited in time.
Sure. What about you, Johan?
Yeah, I think I've got to agree with Peter. I think, well, in Africa, I think we've even got more limited, existing training platforms, etc. But what we have found is, in our annual conferences, that's a great way of sharing knowledge. And I would just, it's always been great to have other international speakers come in and talk about it as well. So we don't have well-established training or webinars, but I can see it's becoming more of a topic going forward.
And Roy.
Well, Betsy, you and I both know we're very fortunate here in the U.S. By having, as Peter noted, and Johan, the depth of guidances and resources coming out and available to us. And for SURF US, we happily post links to guidance documents and other case studies that we think are pertinent to best management practices for sustainability. And of course, we're continuing to do webinars, if not monthly, certainly every other month or so, to be able to get information out to the public and other practitioners about sustainability. And we continue as SURF members in the U.S. to participate in organizations like ASTM and ITRC and help utilize our knowledge to forward that science in sound science in the area of sustainability. So, and I mentioned it earlier in the opening with respect to SURF US, all of our information is always free. It's an available resource to anybody within the world, and I think that's we're gladly to continue to add to that library.
Thanks, Roy. I know I've alluded a couple times to our SURF YouTube page, but those webinars that Roy was referencing are all saved there. The previous versions, this recording will be saved there. We also recently did some really short, 5 minutes or less, trainings on various aspects of those footprint analysis tools, site-wise and CIFA. And we are working to develop short, digestible training and content. And one of our other board members is messaging me on the side and saying, like, what a great opportunity this discussion is to just further develop these relationships, make sure we're sharing our webinars across all of the ISRA organizations, because really everyone is always welcome. And if the time zones don't work out, I know we had lots of time zone discussions for today, but that's the idea behind those recordings is those can always be watched later. Peter, I want to give you an opportunity to plug SUSTREM 2023 if you have anything to say, even if it's just a teaser or where people can find more information. Do you have anything on SUSTREM 2023 for us to look forward to?
Yeah, look, SUSTREM 2023 will be part of our annual, it'll running in parallel with our annual environmental conference, Eco Forum. And so the idea is to get the benefits of having a large group together and to share the sustainability and to work that in in a collaborative way. So it'll probably, I don't think we've set the date yet, it'll be probably around about September next year. And we are, and we're currently working on the program in broad terms. We haven't really got down to the detail, but we'll be looking at case examples. We'll be looking at international developments, because there's a lot of international information and approaches. Looking at the relevance to Australia, how we can apply it Australia, and we'll also address some of the key regulatory issues. We've recently introduced things like in one of the states, for example, clean up so far as reasonably practicable, and just what that means and how that relates and how do you translate it into sustainable remediation. There's a lot of opportunity there, and also addressing particular issues. We've got some, the PFAS issue has been very key in Australia, and it presents pretty intractable problems if you try and apply the regulated requirements rigorously. It can be very, very difficult. And so what are sustainable solutions to things like a PFAS contaminated site? And there can be quite a different range of PFAS contaminated sites with different aspects, and how does that affect the outcome, and how do you apply sustainable remediation? So that's the sort of things that we'll be looking at for SUSTREM, is trying to look across internationally, borrow from the international, make it well known, look at case examples, and also to address some of the key regulatory and difficult issues that we've got in Australia, trying to make it interesting and relevant to people.
Peter, I know we can't see into the future, but are we imagining this will be an in-person event?
I think it will be. We've been, through COVID, we've gone full virtual, but what we're doing now is hybrid, events.
Mm-hmm.
We're finding those pretty costly to do hybrid events. It's not as cheap as it looks to run, to set up, the webinars and things like this. But I suspect, we've opened up Australia a bit like the US, and so I think I'm pretty sure it'll be an in-person one next year.
Great. I have my passport, Peter.
Roy's ready to.
We'd love to see you, Roy.
I love it.
Love to see you.
Well, y'all, we are reaching the end of our time. Just another huge thank you to Johan and to Roy and to Peter and to all of our attendees today for all of the questions and the comments. I know we couldn't get to them all, but we will be following up on each of them. Someone did just ask if it was going to be possible to provide contact information with of y'all's contact information. I imagine that's okay, but we'll confirm with y'all offline. No need for a commitment now. And if nothing else, you'll be able to connect with these organizations. But I imagine that everyone here will be really excited to meet with you and discuss sustainable remediation and their various organizations. This slide is showing our SURF US sponsors, and a huge thank you to each of them. The work that we do wouldn't be possible without them. I realize now we should have had a slide for each of our organizations and their sponsors as well, because there are so many organizations worldwide that are contributing to SURF, ANZ, and NICOLA, and all of the sustainable remediation organizations. And as many folks have said, we're just a group of volunteers that care and really believe that we can make a difference in the work that we're doing. And so with that, I think we'll say goodbye and thank you. Unless, I guess, any of our panelists, any last thoughts? We got 2 minutes left.
I think you've covered it pretty well, Betsy.
Well done, Betsy.
Many thanks to all of y'all for your time. Thank you again to our attendees. We will send out the resources just in a consolidated format. I think that would be a great idea. But if not, have a great day.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Farewell.
Bye.